Now, less than 24 hours after Karmelo Anthony was sentenced to 35 years in prison for the murder of Austin Metcalf, he's already back in the headlines again, but this time, it wasn't because of the verdict. It wasn't because of the sentence itself. And it wasn't even just because he filed an appeal. It was because of what was said in the paperwork. So according to court documents reported by WFAA, Karmelo Anthony actually described himself as a penniless, destitute, and indigent person who was too poor to hire a lawyer for his appeal. And in that same filing, he asked the court to appoint an attorney to represent him. So in plain English, after being sentenced to 35 years in prison, Karmelo Anthony is now claiming he's broke and can't afford an appeals lawyer. And obviously, once people saw that, the reaction was immediate, because this case has already had so many different angles to it, whether it's the actual stabbing of Austin, the self-defense argument, the murder conviction, the 35-year sentence, the online debates, the racial controversy around the jury, and of course, the money that was raised for his legal defense. So when people hear that Karmelo is now claiming he is too poor to afford a lawyer, the natural question becomes, wait a second, what happened to all that money? Because if you don't know, this case had a fundraiser attached to it almost immediately. Around a week after the murder of Austin Metcalf, the fundraiser was reportedly already over $350,000, and just a few days ago, it was reportedly over $600,000. But now, as I'm recording this video, that fundraiser has actually, it appears that it's been shut down. Now, the reason why I'm even bringing all this up is because this new court filing is actually getting a lot of attention. Because when the paperwork says Karmelo is penniless, destitute, and indigent, people are naturally going to compare that to the money that was raised publicly around this case. And it was a lot of money that was raised, right? Now, the truth is this situation is a little more layered than just saying he's broke. Although penniless basically means having no money, destitute means lacking the basic resources to provide for yourself, and indigent in a legal context means someone is too poor to afford their own attorney. So on paper, this is a very strong claim. But legally, the question is not just about whether people online believe him or don't believe him. The question is whether the court looks at his situation, the fundraiser, the legal expenses, who controlled the actual money, and then decides whether he actually qualifies for a court-appointed appellate or appellate? Is it appellate? I gotta look that up 1 second. Appellate pronunciation?
Appellate.
Appellate. Oh, I've been saying it wrong this whole time. And then decide whether he actually qualifies for a court-appointed appellate attorney. So like some ice cream, let me actually kind of give you the scoop, okay? Let's go through this entire thing. So less than 24 hours after Karmelo was sentenced for the murder of Austin Metcalf, he was moved out of Collin County and into the Texas prison system. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice reportedly sent out a new booking photo of him, and this is what he's looking like right now. As y'all can see, he's very bald, okay? He decided to cut off his hair, right? Which makes sense, because having a bunch of hair in prison honestly sounds like another thing you don't want to deal with. Now, according to WFAA, Karmelo was transported to Wallace Pack Unit, basically a Texas state prison near Navasota, not to be confused with Sarasota, Florida. So this is no longer a situation where Karmelo is at home on house arrest. That part is obviously over. Before the conviction, for anyone who did not know, he had been under house arrest while the case was playing out. But once the jury came back with the murder conviction, and once he was sentenced to 35 years in prison for the murder of Austin Metcalf, he was taken into custody at the Collin County Courthouse. And now he is officially in the state prison system beginning that sentence. So at this point, he's officially spent a full 24 hours in prison. But at the same time this was happening, Karmelo also started the appeal process. So less than 1 day after the Collin County jury convicted him of murdering Austin Metcalf and sentenced him to 35 years in prison, Karmelo Anthony filed a notice of appeal. And in this document, he stated that he has no money and wants the judge to appoint him an appeals attorney. So the filing actually says he is a penniless, destitute, and indigent person, too poor to employ counsel to represent me on the appeal. In other words, he's described himself as someone who cannot afford to hire a lawyer for the appeal. Now, obviously, the wording is very strong. He's not saying, hey, I just need some help, right? He's not saying, I would prefer a court-appointed lawyer. He's telling the court, I'm broke, nigga, I'm broke. Nigga, I'm broke. I can't afford an attorney for my appeal. But the reason that statement is getting questioned is because of the fundraiser. Because after the stabbing, after, he did what he did to Austin, Karmelo Anthony's family raised money online for his legal defense. But to be fair, the fundraiser itself was not worded like every dollar was only for legal defense. On the Give, Send, Go page, the purpose of the fund section said legal defense was a critical part of it, but the fund was not solely dedicated to legal expenses. It also mentioned urgent needs connected to the situation, including safe relocation for the Anthony family, basic living costs, transportation, counseling, and security measures. Specifically, this is what it said. while legal defense is a critical part of this journey, we want to make it clear that this fund is not solely dedicated to legal expenses. The funds raised will also support a range of urgent and necessary needs that have emerged as a result of the situation, including, but not limited to, the safe relocation of the Anthony family due to escalating threats to their safety and well-being, as well as basic living costs, transportation, counseling, and other security measures. So as you guys could hear, aside from just the legal stuff that they had to pay for Karmelo, there's also a bunch of other stuff like relocation, and then they're talking about like they're getting threats and stuff. Which, by the way, the Austin Metcalf, like his family as well, Austin's family, they're also getting a bunch of threats. So this is not just a thing that the Karmelo Anthony family is getting. Both families are actually getting threats from the public. But anyway, so that matters, because if the money went toward family relocation or living expenses, that would automatically not mean the money was misused or anything like that, at least based on how the fundraiser was described publicly. But it also creates the exact question people are asking now. If the fundraiser raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for legal defense and other family needs, how does that affect Karmelo now telling the court he is too poor to hire an appellate attorney or lawyer? Appellate. Excuse me, okay? I keep forgetting. This is one word I just keep messing up. I don't know why. So some questions people will have. Number one, where the fuck did the money go, right? Where did the money go? Was it spent on the trial defense? Was it used for other expenses aside from what they mentioned? Was it controlled by Karmelo himself? Was it controlled by his family? Was it only meant for the trial and not the appeal? Are there outstanding legal bills? And these are obviously questions that, let's say, had I donated, I would want to know these things. I do want to mention that earlier in the case, one source called Snopes reported that Give Send Go confirmed no funds had been withdrawn from the fundraiser at that time. But that was back in April of 2025. So obviously I'm not going to treat that as proof of what the money situation looks like today. I'm only bringing this up to say that some of the early viral claims about the family already spending the money were not 100% confirmed at the time. Now back to what I was saying earlier, these are obviously some questions that, let's say, had I donated, I would want to know these things. Because once people donate to something, they naturally want to know whether the money actually went toward the mission they were funding. So the real question is, how does any of that money actually affect whether he qualifies for a court-appointed appellate? I got it right. Lawyer.
Appellate.
Actually, I just realized I got appellate. All right, starting from now, I'm just gonna, whatever comes out of my mouth, just deal with it, okay? Please don't try to correct me in the comments, because that word is beating my ass, bro. So kind of referring to what I just said earlier, I have seen some people online claiming that his family used some of that money for other things, aside from what I read from the fundraiser page, and aside from that one source that I mentioned. I want to be very clear, I don't know if that's true, honestly. I could not personally verify any of that stuff. So I personally just want to focus on the part that I 100% for sure know. The money was raised publicly for his defense, among other things for his family. And then Karmelo's now telling the court he cannot afford an appeals lawyer. And even one major source pointed out that it's still unclear how that fundraiser money will factor into the court's decision. So until there's something more concrete, I'm not going to speculate too much on what the family did or did not spend the money on, because I honestly don't think that's the responsible thing to do with my platform, at least. But of course, there is still a financial elephant in the room here, okay? If hundreds of thousands of dollars were raised around this case, and then one day after his sentencing, he files paperwork saying he's too poor to hire a lawyer, the court is probably going to have to look very closely at that. And by the way, whenever I say poor, it kind of reminds me of that guy like who does skits. I think he lives in Atlanta or something. And then he walks up to people. He's like, you got $1, bub? No, I don't got no money. Nah, I got $1 for you. You poor?
You got $1. There you go, boss. Oh, I thought you were poor.
Because the money could matter when the court decides whether he actually qualifies for a court-appointed appellate attorney. Now, while that money question is what made the headline blow up, the appeal itself is not some random stunt. In Texas, after someone is convicted and sentenced, they generally have 30 days to file a notice of appeal, and I believe that's for most states actually. And that notice is basically the formal first step. It tells the court, I'm appealing this conviction, but it does not lay out the full argument yet. So it's not the appeal itself, it's the paper that starts the appeal process. Basically, it's the legal version of getting the snacks and drinks ready before movie night. The movie hasn't started yet, but you're goddamn right, I'm thirsty, right? Now, according to WFAA, the filing did not contain the specific issue Karmelo plans to raise on appeal. That comes later once appellate lawyers get involved and start reviewing the trial record. And this is where I think people have to understand what an appeal actually is. An appeal doesn't mean the conviction is automatically about to be overturned. It doesn't mean he automatically gets a new trial. It does not mean he's about to come home, okay? An appeal is about whether legal mistakes were made during the trial. So basically, a higher court can look at the transcripts, the judge's rulings, objections, jury selection, and other issues that were raised during the case. and then the court decides whether anything happened that was serious enough to affect the outcome. So if the higher court says something was handled incorrectly, then that could potentially change things for Anthony or Karmelo. But if the higher court says everything was handled properly, then the conviction and sentence stands. And one area people are already watching in this case is jury selection. So this was a very big part of this particular case. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the jury pool started with about 589 prospective jurors. And during jury selection, it was reported that all qualified African Americans, in other words, black jurors, were dismissed by the prosecution. Now, obviously, when you have someone who's black, who's a defendant in a case, and then basically you have no black jurors, obviously that's going to raise questions. And a lot of people are going to be like, what's going on here, right? But this is where the conversation gets a little more complicated. So let's keep talking. Because I was kind of doing a little bit of research on this particular aspect. And one thing I found out was this, right? This is very interesting. And I haven't heard no platform actually bring this up apart from one platform. So CBS actually reported that one prospective juror who prosecutors identified as African American, i.e. black, said he would have a hard time putting a brother in jail. So this potential person who was going to be a juror, it was revealed that in some type of conversation, they said that they would have a hard time putting Karmelo in jail. Now, that part actually matters, right? Because that's not just someone quietly having sympathy. I mean, this was a potential juror openly saying something that suggests he might struggle to judge the case purely based on the evidence. Now, if that specific juror ended up being dismissed because of that answer, that could be argued as a race-neutral reason, meaning the prosecution would be not saying we removed him because he was black. They would be saying we removed him because he told the court he might have a hard time convicting the defendant because he sees him as a brother. So when he says, the whole brother thing, I would have a hard time putting a brother in jail, basically he's saying, hey, he's black, I'm black. I would have a very hard time being objective in this case. That's what he's saying, right? Now let's keep talking though. Another big question here would be whether the prosecution had legitimate race-neutral reasons for each dismissal. So all these people, they said they can't be a part of the jury. Like, were the reasons why they were not a part of the jury, were all those reasons actually valid? So that was a very big thing here, right? And I'm saying that could be brought up in Karmelo's appeal. So that's the exact kind of issue an appellate lawyer may look at later. But again, none of this means the conviction is automatically getting overturned. And some of this is really just my own interpretation of this entire story and case, okay? Just keep that in mind. I'm not the judge here. I'm just the guy with the microphone. Now, while all that is happening, Karmelo is obviously not free. He's not back on house arrest. He is in prison, and he's now begun serving his 35-year sentence. And for anyone who doesn't know, because this is a 35-year murder sentence, he generally has to serve about half of it before he becomes eligible for parole. That means around 17 and a half years before he can even be considered. But parole eligibility and parole release are not the same thing. Just keep that in mind. Just because someone becomes eligible for parole does not mean they automatically get released. It just means the parole board can consider them. Whether they actually get out, that's a separate decision. And here's the thing, because he was sentenced to 35 years, he's not eligible to be released on bond while the appeal is pending. Under Texas law, a defendant, in this case Karmelo Anthony, cannot be released on bail pending appeal from a felony conviction when the punishment is 10 years or more. So again, this appeal does not mean Karmelo gets to wait at home while the higher court reviews the case or nothing like that. The sentence is active. He's in the prison system now. And by the way, no, for anyone wondering, he's not exactly posted up next to TK. TK is at Connolly Unit in Kennedy, which is like a few hours from where Karmelo was sent. But that's beside the point. Unless something changes through the courts, the 35-year sentence still stands. And legally, the jury issue that we had, right, ties into something called a Batson challenge. A Batson challenge is when one side argues that the other side removed potential jurors because of race. In this case, Karmelo's lawyers objected during jury selection after prosecutors struck 3 potential African-American jurors, i.e. black jurors, right? And the prosecution, they denied that race was the reason and said they had other reasons for the strikes. And the judge sided with the prosecution at trial. So that issue did not stop the case from moving forward. But because Karmelo Anthony's defense objected to that, that could still be something appellate lawyers review later. And this is just my personal guess. But if the defense does try to bring up jury selection on appeal, the prosecution may point back to some of the answers given during the jury selection. Because remember earlier, there was one prospective juror who said he would have a hard time putting a brother in jail. So if the defense argues that black jurors were removed because of race, the prosecution could respond by saying no, we're not removing jurors because they were black. We were concerned about whether certain jurors could be impartial based on their answers. You get what I'm saying? And that brother comment could matter for that specific juror because it suggests that person may have struggled to judge the case purely based on the evidence. And low-key, I kind of feel like that person might have messed it up for all the other ones. I don't know. I just have a feeling, right? I don't know if none of these people, like none of these 500 people were connected, or it was like some type of group, or just like all randomly picked somehow. I don't know exactly how that works. I need to look into that. But because that person showed this bias in favor of Karmelo Anthony before the case, I'm thinking that they could probably like find some ways to use all that against Karmelo Anthony. You get what I'm saying? But again, that still does not automatically explain every strike. This is just my own interpretation of things, okay? So the appellate court would have to look at the actual record and decide whether the judge handled the challenge correctly. And this is where the appeal becomes more technical, because outside the courtroom, this case becomes about just so many different things. Race, self-defense, the fundraiser, the media coverage, the public reaction, the way people online spoke about Karmelo, the way people online even spoke about and framed Austin. But inside the courtroom, the prosecution's argument was much more direct. Obviously, we know that they argued Karmelo Anthony committed murder, and after the trial, prosecutor Bill Worski, I think that's how you say it, was asked whether he believed Karmelo intended to kill Austin Metcalf. And his answer was interesting. He said you would have to ask Karmelo that. But then he said what he does know is that Karmelo intentionally plunged a knife into Austin Metcalf's chest. And that basically tells you how the state viewed the case. Their argument was not just that Austin died. The argument was that Karmelo intentionally used a knife in a way that caused Austin death, which is what he did, right? And in the end, the jury convicted him of murder and they gave him 35 years. So as of right now, the situation is that the prosecution says the jury got it right, and then Karmelo Anthony's defense team says there are more important issues for the appellate court to consider. So Karmelo Anthony is, of course, right now he's in prison, and the appeal process has officially started. So the trial may be over, but this case is clearly not done. And now the fight shifts from the courtroom where the jury heard the evidence to the eventual appeal, where lawyers are going to have to argue over whether the trial process itself was handled correctly. And that's why this new filing matters, because yes, the headline is that Karmelo Anthony claims he's broke, but underneath the headline there are two major questions. Will the court actually agree that he's indigent and appoint him a lawyer? And number two, once we actually get to the appeal, will any of the issues from the trial be strong enough to change anything? Because if the answer to that second question is no, then the 35-year sentence stands. So that's where things stand right now. Karmelo has gone from house arrest to a murder conviction, to a 35-year sentence, to the Texas prison system, and now to an appeal filing where he's now claiming he's too poor to afford a lawyer. I'm very curious to hear what you guys think about this update though. Karmelo Anthony says that he's now broke after his 35-year prison sentence. I'm sure you'll have something to say about it. So yeah, you guys let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, I'm out.